Hey everyone, today I'm going to do an overview of prop pallies in Phase 1 of Season of Discovery. We'll look at the new runes as well as level 25 gear, talents, and spells to give better context to these runes and see how prop pallies might fit into raids. Keep in mind, I haven't actually played a prop pally in Season of Discovery, so this is mostly speculation. The most exciting thing about Season of Discovery is that it isn't already a solved game, and we'll have to experiment with what talent, rune, and gear configuration works the best. First, let's look at runes. If you aren't already familiar with this, the rune system is new in Season of Discovery and will allow you to place one rune at a time into an item of a specific gear slot. In Phase 1, the rune slots available are chest, legs, and hands. Let's take a look first at the hand runes. You can see Beacon of Light and Crusader Strike are options, but prop players really only have one choice here, Hand of Reckoning. This is going to give us the Hand of Reckoning ability, which is a taunt. Not having a taunt was one of the biggest issues for prop players in Classic, and this is finally fixed. You also get some amazing passives from this. You'll get bonus threat for Righteous Fury, and gain mana equal to 25% of any healing you receive while Righteous Fury is active. If you've played a prop ally in TBC or Wrath, you'll recognize the latter as Spiritual Attunement, a passive we've had in those expansions. However, in those expansions, Spiritual Attunement only gives up to 10% mana back, so the 25% in SOD is by far the best version of Spiritual Attunement that we've seen. The final passive we get from Hand of Reckoning causes us to take 20% reduced damage from damage that brings us below 35% HP. Again, if you've played a prop ally in Wrath, you'll recognize this as Ardent Defender, just without the cheat death part. This is a really powerful passive that is essentially a mini shield wall when we're low HP. So to summarize, this single rune gives us Hand of Reckoning, Spiritual Attunement, Ardent Defender, and Increased Threat. This is an absolute auto-include rune for prop pallies. I'm a big fan of Blizzard pumping so much stuff into one rune instead of spreading it out amongst several runes, because that means we only have one auto-include rune and we get a lot more freedom in other slots. Let's now look at the chest slot. Here we have a few interesting options. Aegis is just the Wrath version of Redoubt, giving us a passive increase to shield block value and a chance when we get hit to gain 30% block chance. This is the clear defensive winner for this slot and will be extra valuable for reducing damage in ad-heavy boss fights or big trash pulls. Divine Storm is essentially a longer CD and a little bit lower damage Glyph Hammer of the Righteous from Wrath. It will deal 110% weapon damage to 4 nearby enemies and heal 3 nearby raid members for 25% of the damage done. This will be a great AoE threat ability to pick up anytime you don't need the survivability from Aegis. Seal of Martyrdom is another option in the chest. It will deal 30% weapon damage to your target on hit, but deal 10% of the damage back to you. You'll also restore mana to your group equal to 10% of the damage taken from the seal itself. So if you have 100 weapon damage, the seal would hit for 30 and deal 3 damage to you and restore 0.3 mana to your party. I don't think we'll use this one much if it stays in its current form, since you have to replace both a seal and a rune to use it, and the mana return is negligible. The last option in this rune slot is Horn of Lordaeron, which is essentially Horn of Winter from Wrath. However, it's exclusive with Blessing of Might. This is probably only going to be used if you have Blessing of Kings, so you can provide a Kings plus Horn combo, and you're the only pally in the whole group. If there's another pally in the group, I can't imagine spending a rune slot on Horn to replace Blessing of Might unless you have a lot of hunters. The last rune slot for Phase 1 is Legs. Pretty much every option here is at least situationally interesting. However, Avenger Shield is likely going to be the most used rune. This is instant cast and it scales with 9.1% of both attack power and spell power. This is just an amazing ability for multi-target snap threat. We also have the option to go for Exorcist, which makes Exorcism usable on all mob types and have guaranteed crits on undead and demons like in Wrath. Keep in mind the vanilla Exorcism is also instant cast. Exorcism scales with 42.9% of spell power, but in Phase 1 we'll only have rank 1 available. It's looking like Avenger Shield will actually be better even for single target DPS due to its higher base damage and attack power scaling, which will be more readily available than spell power. For this reason, Exorcist probably needs to also give a percent damage increase to Exorcism to become useful. We also have Divine Sacrifice in this slot. It will redirect 30% of all damage taken by party members, but the effect will break if you go below 20% HP, and you'll get a 10% damage and healing buff. However, it cannot be used while you have an immunity effect on you. This could be good for some fights with high raid damage and low tank damage, or while you aren't currently tanking. This is a rune that will be dependent on the specific fight for how useful it is. Speaking of which, next up we've got Inspiration Exemplar. This just makes you a walking tremor totem, which is kind of hilarious. Any fight with AoE fear, this will be a must-have. Lastly, we've got Rebuke. Finally, Pallies have a reliable interrupt. This again will be situational. Basically, you'll use this anytime interrupts are important and the rest of your group can't handle them on their own. Now let's look at gear to give you an idea of what our unbuffed stats will look like at this level in pre-raid gear. Don't get too caught up in whether each slot has the perfect item in it. This is just to give a general idea of stats with items that are reasonable to obtain. In this set, we have unbuffed about 1100 HP and a little over 2k armor, giving us about 45% damage reduction against same level mobs. With buffs, you can expect this to go up to around 1500 plus HP and 2500 plus armor. At this point, we kind of have to just wait and see how hard BFD mobs are hitting before we will know how much survivability we need to go for. I think a set with Stam plus Strength or Agi in pretty much every slot is a safe bet to begin with, since we now have much better attack power scaling due to the additions of Divine Storm and Avenger's Shield. Strength is going to be a lot more desirable than it was before. Defense at this level feels pretty bad to go for because a few points of defense generally takes up an item's entire budget. Depending on how hard things hit, we could also find ourselves using two-handers a lot. We'll have to wait and see how necessary shields actually are. I personally hope they tune things so that shields are necessary. There's going to be a bunch of brand new gear coming out too that we haven't even seen yet. Some pieces have been shown at BlizzCon or data mined though. The most notable piece I've seen is the Shifting Silver Breastplate. This thing has amazing stats as well as a mini Gift of Arthas proc that will give a solid raid DPS increase. I'm really curious to see how much thread is generated when this procs too. The chest does require blacksmithing to use, so I'm planning to go blacksmithing plus engineering. Let's now look at a couple potential talent builds. The first spec is a pretty traditional classic Prot Pally spec, going first into Holy to pick up Consecration. Divine Strength is a lot better now that we have better attack power scaling. Imp Seal of Righteousness will increase the damage of our main seal, a no-brainer pickup. Consecration is an incredible AoE threat ability, but you may be able to go without it if you need to bring Kings for your raid or you need to be a little bit tankier. Imp Righteous Fury combined with Avenger's Shield and or Divine Storm will probably be enough for you to do solid AoE threat. You have some options for the 5 points after Consecration. Imp Play on Hands will be really useful if there are any super hard-hitting bosses. Otherwise, the points can go into Redoubt, Imp Devo, or Imp Might. I'm favoring Redoubt over Imp Devo because Imp Devo only provides 13.8 armor per point for about 69 total armor at 5 points. Unbuffed and pre-raid gear, this is about a 0.7% armor increase per point compared to the 2% per point of toughness. Though keep in mind, toughness only applies to item armor. Evo Aura will of course affect the rest of your group too, but the only people taking physical damage reduced by armor should be you and the other tank. A lot of the time you won't both be taking damage at the same time, so often only one player at a time will benefit from the increased Evo armor. If it turns out there are encounters with adds that can't be picked up by tanks, or raid damage that is reduced by armor, Imp Devo would become much more appealing. If we end up using two-handers a lot, Imp Devo would also become the obvious choice. Redoubt is kind of a weird talent because it requires you to be crit to proc, but Prot Pallies are also the only tanks that have no way to be crit immune. I was really hoping they'd rework this talent and Reckoning to not require you to be crit, but it looks like they're kind of leaning into us being the only critable tanks. You probably noticed the Aegis talent said it was not cumulative with Redoubt, but Redoubt is still worth getting even with Aegis, as it will increase your uptime on a 30% block buff, even if they won't stack when procced at the same time. Aegis also gives 30% block value, further increasing the value of block chance. Imp Might is another option with your final 5 points if you're going the Consecration spec. If nobody else is bringing this to the raid, I'd probably pick it up over Redoubt. The second spec is the Prot spec. This is a spec you could go if you need to be a bit tankier or bring Kings for your raid. We've already talked about Redoubt and Imp Devo, so let's look at the second tier. It is hard to come by and we can pick 3% hit up from Precision here. With the addition of Divine Storm, this should be a great pick. You can potentially pick up Guardian's Favor if there ends up being good use for reduced bop cooldown or increased freedom duration in BFD. Toughness is always solid, just giving us more armor. Kings is a great buff that you'll want in all of your raids. Even in pre-raid gear, it's already going to give us around 13 strength, 10 stam, and 5 agi, the equivalent of about 2 items. This buff can also be brought by hunters, but they have to spend a rune slot on it. Emperor's Fury will just cause you to do more threat, which is always a good thing. Shield Specialization's value will vary depending on what you're fighting. If you're fighting low damage mobs, it will be a lot more valuable than if you're fighting higher damage mobs. It will also be far more valuable when using the Aegis rune. Anticipation will give you 0.08% dodge, parry, block, miss, and reduced chance to be crit per point. Instead of 4 defense from 2 points in anticipation, we can get 4% armor from toughness or 20% shield block from shield spec, which I think are both better plays. As for talents pre-level 25, it really depends on what you're doing and what runes are available. I'm likely going to do ret questing until 20, then start dungeon grinding with consecration spec. Alright, so now that we've looked at runes, talents, and gear, let's look at what spells will actually be available to us at level 25. Here are all of the spells available to us. So you'll see we do have a pretty solid toolkit this phase already. We really aren't missing too much big stuff. And here are the spells coming in future phases. I'm interested to see how things shake out with no Blessing of Salve until phase 2, but I think prop values will be totally fine with all of our new threat additions. In phase 3, we'll get Cleanse, Hammer of Wrath, and Holy Wrath. I'm guessing Holy Wrath will probably get a rune to make it instant cast and deal damage to all mob types like in Kata. In phase 4, we mostly just get new ranks, but we will finally have blessings that last longer than 5 minutes. Given the full context of prop values at level 25, they should be the best tanks by far for AoE threat, multi-mob survivability, and raid utility, which is just what you're used to from Prop Valley if you've played TBC or Wrath. I think they'll also have some of the best single target threat, but their biggest weaknesses will be crits from hard-hitting bosses, especially those with Thrash, lack of mobility, and inability to bring attack power or attack speed debuffs, making them a bit reliant on others. Prot Pally is looking to me like the best overall tank in phase 1 of SOD, but I'm interested to see how it plays out. I'm really excited to see what Season of Discovery has in store for us as it develops, and I can't wait to finally play the classic Prot Pally I always wanted to. I stream most days at twitch.tv/subtlefw, and will be streaming a ton of Season of Discovery tanking. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.